In a quiet little suburb just outside of Alexandria, Virginia, there lived a woman who was the heart and soul of her community. She wasn't just any woman, she was a doctor, an obstetrician to be exact. Her name wasn't important. What mattered was how much she cared about people. Every day she worked tirelessly at the local hospital, helping expectant mothers bring new life into the world. To her patients, she was more than a doctor. She was a friend, a guide, and sometimes even a shoulder to cry on. Her husband was cut from the same cloth of dedication and service, though his world couldn't have been more different from hers. He was a soldier, a highly trained commander in one of the most elite units in the military. While she spent her days surrounded by the joy of childbirth, he often found himself in places where danger lurked around every corner. Despite their vastly different lives, they shared something special. A deep love for each other and an unshakable bond that kept them grounded no matter where life took them. They had been trying to start a family for years, and finally, after months of anticipation, they got the news they'd been waiting for. She was pregnant. It felt like the universe had aligned perfectly, giving them this gift when they least expected it but needed it most. They were overjoyed, imagining all the milestones ahead, the first kick, the baby shower, the nursery setup, and eventually, holding their child for the very first time. Life seemed picture perfect. But as anyone who's ever heard a story knows, perfection is fleeting. And theirs shattered on a chilly Tuesday evening in late November. After finishing her shift at the IDU hospital, she decided to stop by the grocery store to pick up a few things. The pregnancy hadn't slowed her down yet, so running errands still felt normal. She grabbed a cart, walked through the aisles, and picked out fresh vegetables, fruit, and some snacks for the house. As she paid for her items and headed toward her car, she noticed a group of young men loitering near the parking lot entrance. They didn't look suspicious at first glance, just kids hanging out, but something about the way they stood made her pause. She shook off the feeling, chalking it up to paranoia. After all, this was her neighborhood. She knew these streets like the back of her hand. What could possibly go wrong here? Still, she quickened her pace slightly, eager to get home and put her feet up. But before she reached her car, one of the men stepped into her path. At first, he said nothing, just stared at her with a coldness that sent shivers down her spine. Then came the demand. "Give me your purse," he growled, his voice low but firm. His friends closed in behind him, forming a semicircle that blocked her escape. Panic bubbled inside her chest, but she tried to stay calm. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm pregnant. I don't want any trouble." For a moment, there was silence. Maybe they'll let me go, she thought. Maybe they'll see I'm not worth the risk. But then the leader of the group smirked, a cruel glint in his eye. "That ain't my problem," he spat, reaching for her bag. When she instinctively pulled away, he lost patience. Without warning, he raised his hand and struck her across the face. The blow sent her sprawling onto the asphalt, the groceries spilling everywhere. Pain shot through her cheek, but worse than that was the fear that gripped her heart. Not for herself, but for the tiny life growing inside her. As she lay there, dazed and gasping for breath, one of the attackers snatched her purse and rifled through it, taking whatever cash and valuables he could find. The others laughed, mocking her as if her pain was entertainment. Time seemed to slow down as she struggled to process what was happening. This wasn't supposed to happen here. Not in her safe little corner of the world. Finally, they left her, there sprawled on the ground like trash, and disappeared into the night. For a few seconds, she stayed frozen, unsure if she should move or call out for help. Then, summoning every ounce of strength she had, she fumbled for her phone and dialed 911. Her hands shook so badly she could barely press the numbers, but somehow she managed. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder until they filled the air. Paramedics arrived soon after, loading her onto a stretcher and rushing her to the hospital. News of the attack spread quickly, reaching her husband while he was stationed hundreds of miles away. He was preparing for another deployment, poring over maps and briefing documents in a sterile conference room. When the call came in, his entire body went rigid. At first, he thought it was a mistake. How could this happen? To her? In their own backyard? But as the details unfolded, reality hit him like a freight train. His wife, the love of his life, had been attacked, and she was carrying their unborn child. The next few hours passed in a blur. He requested emergency leave immediately, knowing full well that bureaucracy wouldn't care about his personal crisis. But this wasn't just any soldier asking for time off. This was a man whose reputation commanded respect, whose skills were unmatched, and whose loyalty to his country was absolute. Permission was granted without question. As he boarded the flight back home, his mind raced with questions. Who were these cowards? Why had they targeted her? And most importantly, what would it take to make sure they never hurt anyone else again? Back in Alexandria, doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize her condition. Thankfully, both mother and baby survived the ordeal, though they remained under close observation. Visitors came and went, offering words of comfort and support. Friends brought flowers and cards, filling the room with warmth despite the grim circumstances. But none of it mattered to him. All he cared about was seeing her awake, hearing her voice, knowing she was okay. When he finally walked into her hospital room, the sight nearly broke him. There she was, lying pale and fragile against the white sheets, her face bruised and swollen. Tubes and monitors surrounded her, a stark reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her cheeks, and whispered, "I'm sorry." Sorry? For what? For being attacked? For surviving? The absurdity of those words stung more than anything else. He sat beside her, taking her hand in his, and promised her one thing: justice. No matter what it took, no matter how long it lasted, he would find the people responsible and make sure they paid for what they'd done. Because this wasn't just about revenge. It was about protecting their future. Theirs and everyone else's who might cross paths with these monsters. The days that followed the attack were a blur of emotions, hospital visits, and unanswered questions. Her husband stayed by her side as much as possible, holding her hand through sleepless nights and reassuring her that everything would be okay. But deep down, they both knew it wouldn't truly be okay until justice was served. The attack had left scars, not just on her face but in their minds. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those young men laughing at her pain. Every creak of the hospital door made her flinch, wondering if someone else might come to finish what they started. Her husband tried to hide his anger, but it simmered just beneath the surface. He wasn't the type to lose control, though. Years of discipline in the military had taught him how to channel emotion into action. So instead of lashing out, he began piecing together a plan. First, he reached out to local law enforcement, hoping they could track down the attackers quickly. But as the days turned into a week, it became clear that progress was slow. The police weren't ignoring the case, they did care, but resources were stretched thin, and this wasn't the only crime happening in the city. Frustration gnawed at him. He understood the limitations of the system, but understanding didn't make the waiting any easier. Sitting around felt unbearable when every fiber of his being wanted to act. Still, he forced himself to stay patient for her sake. She needed him calm and steady, not reckless or impulsive. Yet even as he played the role of devoted partner, his mind was racing. He couldn't shake the image of her lying on the cold asphalt, helpless and scared. That image fueled something inside him, a quiet determination that grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, after she'd fallen asleep, he stepped out of the hospital room to take a call from an old friend. This wasn't just any friend. It was someone he trusted deeply, someone who had fought alongside him in some of the toughest missions overseas. They exchanged pleasantries briefly before getting to the real reason for the call. "I need your help," he said, his voice low but firm. On the other end of the line, his friend didn't hesitate. "Whatever you need." Over the next hour, they talked strategy. His friend agreed to dig up whatever information he could about recent gang activity in the area. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Armed with this lead, he decided to take matters into his own hands, not recklessly, but methodically. If the police couldn't move fast enough, then maybe he could nudge things along. After all, he had skills most people didn't. Skills honed over years of training and experience. He began visiting neighborhoods where similar crimes had been reported, blending in like a shadow. People didn't notice him. He made sure of that. To them, he was just another face in the crowd, another stranger passing through. But behind his unassuming demeanor lay a sharp mind, analyzing every detail, connecting dots others might miss. He talked to shopkeepers, gas station attendants, anyone who might have seen something unusual lately. Slowly but surely, patterns started to emerge. The attackers weren't random thugs looking to make a quick buck. They were part of something bigger, a network of criminals operating under the radar. At first glance, they seemed disorganized, but closer inspection revealed structure. There were leaders, enforcers, and lookouts, each playing a specific role. They preyed on vulnerable targets, people walking alone, late-night shoppers, anyone easy to intimidate. And they covered their tracks well, leaving little evidence behind. As he gathered more information, a name kept coming up. A man known only as Big Dog. No one knew his real identity, but rumors painted him as the mastermind behind the operation. According to whispers on the street, Big Dog ran a tight ship, demanding loyalty and obedience from his crew. Anyone who crossed him disappeared without a trace. The thought sent a chill down his spine, but it also solidified his resolve. If Big Dog was pulling the strings, then taking him down would dismantle the entire operation. But going after someone like Big Dog wasn't going to be easy. For starters, finding him would require more than casual conversations with locals. It would mean infiltrating the group itself, gaining their trust, and earning access to their inner circle. The risks were enormous, but so were the stakes. He weighed his options carefully, knowing full well that failure could cost him everything. Not just his life, but the lives of his wife and unborn child. Before making a move, he confided in his wife. Well, sort of. He didn't tell her everything, that would only worry her more, but he did share enough to prepare her for what might come next. "I'm going to find these guys," he told her one night, his tone gentle but resolute. She looked at him, her eyes filled with fear and admiration. "Promise me you'll be careful," she whispered, her voice trembling. He nodded, squeezing her hand tightly. "I promise." With her blessing, or as close to it as he could get, he dove headfirst into the world of crime and deception. Posing as a businessman interested in laundering money, he approached one of the lower-ranking members of the gang. It wasn't hard to spot them. They wore flashy clothes, drove expensive cars, and carried themselves with a swagger that screamed, "Fake wealth." He introduced himself casually, spinning a story about wanting to expand his operations beyond state lines. The guy bought it, hook, line, and sinker. From there, things moved quickly. Within days, he was invited to meet higher-ups in the organization. Each meeting brought him closer to Big Dog, but also deeper into danger. Every interaction was a test of nerve, every conversation a potential trap. Yet, he never wavered. Decades of training kicked in, allowing him to stay calm under pressure, think on his feet, and adapt to whatever curveballs came his way. During this time, his wife continued recovering, slowly regaining her strength. She still worried about him constantly, but she also understood why he was doing it. Justice wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about reclaiming peace, restoring balance, and ensuring no one else had to endure what she had. So while part of her wished he'd let the authorities handle it, another part of her admired his courage and conviction. Meanwhile, he worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and building a case against the gang. He knew he couldn't do it alone, so he reached out to trusted comrades from his military days. These weren't just colleagues, they were brothers in arms, men who had faced death together and lived to tell the tale. When he explained the situation, none of them hesitated. They offered their support, working quietly in the background to ensure his safety and success. By the end of the second week, he had uncovered shocking truths about the gang's activities. They weren't just petty thieves or bullies. They were involved in human trafficking, drug smuggling, and extortion. Their reach extended far beyond Alexandria, touching cities across multiple states. The scale of their operation was staggering, and the realization hit him hard. This wasn't just about avenging an attack anymore. It was about dismantling a machine built to destroy lives. Every piece of information he gathered strengthened his resolve. He thought about his wife, lying in that hospital bed, bruised and broken, but still fighting. He thought about the baby they were expecting, a symbol of hope and new beginnings. And he thought about everyone else who might become victims if he didn't stop them now. Failure wasn't an option. As he prepared for the final phase of his mission, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. What he was about to do went against everything he believed in as a soldier. Soldiers follow orders, operate within rules, and uphold the law. But sometimes the law falls short. Sometimes justice requires stepping outside the lines. Was he ready to cross that boundary? Yes, he decided, because this wasn't just about following orders. It was about protecting the people he loved. The deeper he went into the gang's world, the more dangerous things became. Every meeting, every conversation, and every step forward felt like walking on thin ice. One wrong move could send everything crashing down, not just for him, but for his family too. Yet despite the growing risks, he pressed on. He reminded himself why he was doing this every time doubt crept in. The image of her lying on the cold ground, scared and hurt, kept him grounded. That memory burned brighter than any fear. As he climbed higher in the gang's ranks, he started noticing how organized they really were. These weren't just reckless kids looking to cause trouble. They were part of a well-oiled machine. Each member had a role, from the enforcers who intimidated people into compliance to the runners who handled deliveries and pickups. There were even guys whose sole job was to act as lookouts, keeping an eye out for cops or anyone suspicious. It was clear that whoever was running this operation knew what they were doing. But there was one thing they didn't know: who he really was. To them, he was just another guy trying to make some quick cash by laundering money through their network. They never suspected that beneath his calm exterior lay years of military training, tactical expertise, and a relentless drive for justice, and that gave him an edge. While they saw him as harmless, a pawn in their game, he was quietly gathering intel, piecing together the puzzle of their entire operation. One evening, during a meeting at a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town, he finally got his first real break. The man he'd been dealing with so far, a mid-level enforcer named Rico, introduced him to someone higher up. This new guy went by the nickname Viper, and he wasn't shy about showing off his authority. Viper strutted around like he owned the place, barking orders and throwing insults at anyone who dared question him. But what caught his attention most was the way Viper spoke about Big Dog. "Big Dog doesn't mess around," Viper said, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin. "If you want to work with us, you got to prove yourself, no exceptions." His stomach tightened. Prove himself? What exactly did that mean? Before he could ask, Viper handed him a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Take this to the warehouse, on 5th Street tomorrow night. Be there at midnight sharp, don't be late." He nodded, careful not to show any hesitation. Inside, though, his mind was racing. What was in the package? Where was it going? And what would happen if he failed to deliver it? For now, he played along, thanking Viper and slipping the package into his bag. But as soon as he left the bar, he made a detour to a secluded parking lot where his trusted friend from the military was waiting. Together, they carefully opened the package. Inside was a stack of counterfeit bills and a list of names, people, owed money, people involved in shady deals, and others marked with ominous red X's. His friend's face darkened as he scanned the contents. "This isn't just petty crime," he muttered. "These guys are playing a bigger game than we thought." He agreed silently, his jaw tightening. If they didn't stop this now, innocent lives would be at risk. Over the next few days, he continued, playing his role, attending meetings and following orders while secretly documenting everything. He snapped photos of key locations, recorded conversations when possible, and jotted down notes whenever he had a moment alone. All the while, he stayed vigilant, knowing that trust within the gang was fragile. One slip-up, One hint of suspicion, and it would all fall apart. Then came the moment he'd been dreading and preparing for. Viper called him again, this time with a more direct test. "Big Dog wants to meet you," Viper announced, his tone dripping with both excitement and warning. "If you pass his inspection, you're in. If not..." He let the sentence hang, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Failure meant death. Or worse. That night, sleep eluded him. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of his plan in his head. He knew the stakes were higher than ever before. Meeting Big Dog wasn't just another step. It was the climax of everything he'd worked toward. Success would give him access to the heart of the operation, allowing him to dismantle it from the inside. Failure would leave his wife and unborn child vulnerable to retaliation. When morning came, he pushed aside his fears and focused on preparation. He reviewed the evidence he'd collected so far, making sure it was secure and ready to hand over to the authorities once the time was right. Then he reached out to his military contacts again, briefing them on the situation and ensuring they were prepared to act if things went south. Finally, he visited his wife in the hospital, holding her hand tightly as he promised her, for the 100th time, that he'd come back safe. "I believe you," she whispered, though her eyes betrayed her worry. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" he asked softly. "That you'll remember why you're doing this. Not for revenge, but for us. For our future." Her words stayed with her husband long after he left the hospital. They echoed in his mind as he drove to the designated meeting spot later that night, a remote industrial park on the edge of town. The air was thick with tension as he parked his car and approached the warehouse. 2 guards stood outside, their faces hidden beneath hoods, weapons glinting in the moonlight. They frisked him roughly before letting him inside. The interior of the warehouse was dimly lit, shadows dancing across the walls. In the center of the room sat a large desk, behind which lounged a man who could only be Big Dog. Unlike the brash, loud personalities of his underlings, Big Dog exuded a quiet menace. He was older, with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through you. When he spoke, his voice was calm but laced with authority. "So you're the new guy," he said, studying him intently. "Tell me something. Why should I trust you?" For a brief moment, panic flickered in his chest, but then he remembered his training, his purpose, and the woman waiting for him back home. With steady confidence, he leaned forward slightly and met Big Dog's gaze. "Because I've got nothing to lose," he replied evenly, "and everything to gain." Big Dog stared at him for a long moment, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, he smirked faintly. "We'll see," he said, gesturing for him to sit. "Let's talk business." What followed was a grueling interrogation disguised as casual conversation. Big Dog asked probing questions about his background, his motives, and his plans. He answered each one carefully, weaving truth and fabrication into a believable narrative. By the end of the meeting, Big Dog appeared satisfied, at least for now. "You've got potential," he said, standing up. "But remember, loyalty is earned, not given." As he walked out of the warehouse, his heart pounded with equal parts relief and dread. He'd done it. He'd gained Big Dog's trust. But now the real challenge began. Getting close to the leader was one thing. Taking down the entire operation was another. And he knew better than anyone that the closer he got to victory, the greater the danger became. Back at his temporary hideout, a rented apartment miles away from his wife's hospital, he pored over the information he'd gathered. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. The gang's activities extended far beyond street-level crimes. They were deeply entrenched in human trafficking rings, supplying drugs to major cities and extorting businesses under the threat of violence. Their reach was vast, their influence pervasive. Taking them down wouldn't just save his family, it would protect countless others from falling victim to their schemes. With renewed determination, he reached out to his military comrades once more. Together, they devised a plan to strike at the heart of the organization. Using the intel he'd collected, they identified key locations, mapped escape routes, and coordinated with local law enforcement to ensure minimal collateral damage. It wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be without risk. But he was ready. More than ready. Before putting the final phase of his plan into motion, he took a moment to reflect. This journey had changed him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. It had tested his limits, forced him to confront his darkest fears, and reminded him of what truly mattered in life. As he looked at the photo of his wife taped to the wall, a small reminder of why he was fighting, he allowed himself a rare smile. Justice wasn't just about vengeance, it was about hope. Hope for a safer world, hope for a brighter future, and above all, hope for the family he loved more than anything else. The plan was set. Every detail had been scrutinized, every possible outcome weighed. He knew this was the moment of truth, the culmination of weeks of preparation, sacrifice, and sheer willpower. The stakes couldn't have been higher. One wrong move, one overlooked variable, and everything could unravel. But he wasn't thinking about failure anymore. His mind was laser-focused on one thing: dismantling the gang that had terrorized his wife and countless others. It was a cold, moonless night when the operation began, the kind of night where shadows seemed alive, shifting and stretching like they were part of the mission themselves. He stood outside the warehouse where Big Dog's crew operated out of, his breath visible in the frosty air. Around him, his trusted team from the military moved with precision, their movements silent but deliberate. They weren't just soldiers. They were ghosts, melting into the darkness as if they belonged there. Inside his head, he replayed the layout of the compound. It wasn't just a building, it was a fortress. Reinforced doors, armed guards stationed at every corner, and cameras scanning for intruders. Breaking in wouldn't be easy, but years of training had taught him how to turn obstacles into opportunities. The key was timing, striking hard and fast before anyone realized what was happening. He signaled to his team and they split up, each taking their assigned positions. Some would disable the security systems, others would neutralize the guards without causing unnecessary harm. Non-lethal force was the priority here. This wasn't about revenge or bloodshed, it was about justice. And justice meant ensuring no innocent lives were caught in the crossfire. As he approached the main entrance, his heart pounded in his chest, but his hands remained steady. Decades of discipline kept fear at bay, replacing it with razor-sharp focus. With a nod to one of his comrades, they breached the door, moving swiftly inside. The interior was chaotic, a maze of corridors, crates stacked high, and dim lighting that cast eerie shadows on the walls. Voices echoed faintly in the distance, muffled by the hum of machinery. They navigated the labyrinthine space with ease, guided by the intel he'd painstakingly gathered over weeks. Each step brought them closer to their target, Big Dog himself. Along the way, they encountered resistance, guards who tried to fight back only to be subdued quickly and quietly. No shots fired, no alarms triggered. The operation was unfolding exactly as planned. Finally, they reached the inner sanctum, a large room filled with expensive furniture, monitors displaying live feeds from various locations, and stacks of cash piled on a table like a monument to greed. In the center of it all sat Big Dog, reclining in a leather chair as if he owned the world. Beside him stood Viper, his ever-loyal enforcer, pacing nervously. Neither of them seemed to notice the intrusion until it was too late. Big Dog froze when he saw the men entering the room, their faces obscured by masks and their weapons trained on him. For a brief moment, confusion flickered across his face, followed by anger. "Who the hell are you?" he barked, rising from his seat. But before he could say anything else, the leader of the team stepped forward, pulling off his mask. Recognition dawned in Big Dog's eyes, but it wasn't relief. It was pure, unadulterated fear. "You," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You're the guy who—" "That's right," the husband interrupted, his tone ice cold. "I'm the guy whose wife you attacked, the guy whose life you tried to ruin." Big Dog stammered, trying to defend himself, but words failed him. Instead, he turned to Viper, gesturing wildly. "Do something!" he shouted. But Viper was frozen, paralyzed by the sight of the highly trained operatives surrounding them. There was nowhere to run, no escape. The realization hit Big Dog like a freight train, and for the first time in his life he looked truly powerless. The rest of the operation unfolded smoothly. The team secured the area, gathering evidence, documents, digital files, recordings that would expose the gang's operations to the authorities. Every piece of information was meticulously catalogued, ensuring nothing was left behind. Meanwhile, local law enforcement arrived on the scene, alerted ahead of time to coordinate the takedown. Officers swarmed the compound, arresting everyone involved, while paramedics tended to those injured during the confrontation. Through it all, he remained calm, almost detached. This wasn't personal, not entirely. It wasn't about making Big Dog suffer or exacting revenge for what had happened to his wife. It was about accountability, about proving that actions have consequences, no matter how untouchable someone might think they are. When the dust settled, he found himself standing face to face with Big Dog once more. Handcuffs bound the man's wrists and 2 officers flanked him, ready to escort him away. For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then, in a voice low enough that only Big Dog could hear, he said, "You picked the wrong person to mess with." Big Dog didn't respond. He simply stared at the ground, defeated. As the officers let him out, the husband felt a strange mix of emotions wash over him. Relief, satisfaction, and even a hint of sadness. Sadness not for Big Dog, but for the lives destroyed by his greed and cruelty. Lives that could never truly be repaired, no matter how much justice was served. Back at the hospital, his wife waited anxiously for news. She hadn't asked for details about what he was doing. She trusted him implicitly, but she knew something big was happening. When he finally walked into her room, his face told her everything she needed to know. Relief flooded her features and tears welled up in her eyes. "It's over," he said softly, sitting beside her and taking her hand in his. "It's done." She nodded, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. All the pain, fear, and uncertainty of the past few weeks melted away in that moment. They had faced unimaginable challenges, but together, they had come out stronger on the other side. Their bond, which had always been strong, felt unbreakable now. News of the takedown spread quickly, both locally and nationally. Reporters flocked to Alexandria, eager to uncover the story behind the dramatic raid. While names were withheld, to protect identities, whispers circulated about the mysterious figure who had infiltrated the gang and brought it crashing down. Some called him a hero, others labeled him reckless. But none of that mattered to him. What mattered was that the threat was gone, and his family was safe. In the days that followed, the couple focused on healing. Physically, she was recovering well, though emotional scars would take longer to fade. Mentally, he struggled too, grappling with the weight of everything he'd done. Playing the role of a criminal, walking among dangerous people, and orchestrating such a high-stakes operation had taken its toll. But every time doubt crept in, he reminded himself why he'd done it. For her. For the baby they were expecting. For the future they deserved. Friends and family rallied around them, offering support and love in abundance. Cards poured in from colleagues, patients, and neighbors, expressing gratitude and admiration. Even strangers reached out, sharing stories of how the gang's downfall had impacted their own lives. It was a reminder that justice isn't just about individuals, it's about communities, about creating a safer, better world for everyone. As the weeks passed, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such an ordeal. She returned home from the hospital, leaning on him for support as she adjusted to being discharged. Together, they prepared for the arrival of their child, painting the nursery, picking out tiny clothes, and dreaming of the moments ahead. Laughter filled their home again, replacing the tension and fear that had lingered for so long. But amidst the joy, they never forgot the lessons they'd learned. Life is fragile, unpredictable, and precious. Love is worth fighting for. And sometimes, standing up for what's right means stepping into the unknown, even when the odds seem insurmountable. These truths became the foundation of their new chapter, a chapter filled with hope, resilience, and the promise of brighter days ahead. And as they sat together one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, he wrapped his arms around her and whispered, "We made it." She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "Yeah," she replied softly. "We did." For the first time in a long time, they allowed themselves to believe it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family. The months that followed the takedown of Big Dog's gang were a mix of healing, reflection, and anticipation. The couple had weathered one of the toughest storms of their lives, and while the scars, both visible and invisible, remained, they carried themselves with a quiet strength that inspired everyone around them. Their story wasn't just about survival. It was about resilience, courage, and the unyielding power of love. Her recovery continued steadily, though there were moments when the memories of that night crept back in. Sometimes it was triggered by something small, a loud noise, a stranger walking too close, or even the sight of a grocery store parking lot. But she didn't let those moments define her. Instead, she leaned on her husband, her friends, and the growing network of support that surrounded her. Therapy sessions helped her process the trauma, giving her tools to cope and reminding her that healing wasn't linear. It was messy, imperfect, and deeply personal. For him, the journey was different but equally challenging. While he had always been a man of action, someone who thrived under pressure, this mission had pushed him to his limits. Playing the role of an infiltrator, walking among criminals, and making decisions that could have ended in disaster weighed heavily on him. At night, he sometimes woke up drenched in sweat, haunted by flashes of what could have gone wrong. Yet every time fear threatened to take hold, he reminded himself of the outcome. The gang was dismantled. Lives were saved. His family was safe. Their bond deepened through these shared struggles. They talked openly about their fears, their hopes, and their dreams for the future. Conversations often stretched late into the night, punctuated by laughter and tears. They learned to lean on each other not just as partners but as anchors, steadying forces that kept them grounded during turbulent times. Together, they began rebuilding their sense of normalcy, finding joy in simple moments like cooking dinner. Together, taking long walks and planning for the baby's arrival. As the due date approached, excitement bubbled over. The nursery was ready, a soft pastel haven filled with stuffed animals, books, and tiny onesies folded neatly in drawers. Friends and family threw a baby shower, filling their home with warmth and well wishes. For the first time in months, they allowed themselves to feel truly happy. The shadow of the attack still lingered, but it no longer loomed over them. It was just another chapter in their story, one that had shaped them but wouldn't define them forever. When the day finally came, it arrived unexpectedly, as most things do. She woke up in the middle of the night feeling sharp pains in her abdomen. Panic surged briefly, but years of medical training kicked in, and she calmly assessed the situation. "It's time," she said, nudging her husband awake. He sprang out of bed immediately, grabbing the hospital bag they'd packed weeks ago. The drive to the hospital felt surreal. Outside, the world was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. Inside the car, their hearts raced with a mixture of nerves and excitement. Neither of them spoke much. They didn't need to. Just holding hands was enough to convey everything they couldn't put into words. At the hospital, the labor was long and exhausting. Hours passed in a blur of contractions, breathing exercises, and encouraging words from the nurses. Through it all, he stayed by her side, wiping her brow, offering sips of water and whispering reassurances. "You're doing amazing," he told her repeatedly, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the moment arrived. A cry pierced the air, a tiny, fragile sound that instantly filled the room with life. Tears streamed down both their faces as the doctor placed the newborn in her arms. She looked down at the little bundle, her heart swelling with a love so profound it almost hurt. "Hi there," she murmured, brushing a finger against the baby's cheek. "Welcome to the world." He stood beside her, gazing at their child, with awe. All the fear, anger, and uncertainty of the past months melted away in that instant. This was why they had fought so hard. This was their reward, their miracle, their future. In the days that followed, they settled into the rhythm of parenthood. Sleepless nights gave way to tender moments of connection. Watching their baby sleep, change expressions, or grasp their fingers with impossibly small hands brought them immense joy. Every milestone, the first smile, the first coo, the first attempt at lifting her head, felt monumental. Life slowed, down in the best possible way, forcing them to savor every second. But amidst the happiness, they never forgot where they had come from. The attack, the gang, the fight for justice, all of it had shaped them in ways they couldn't ignore. They made a conscious effort to honor that journey by using their experience to help others. She returned to work part-time, counseling women who had faced violence and trauma. Her own story became a source of inspiration, showing patients that healing was possible no matter how broken they felt. He too found purpose in sharing what he had learned. Though his military career remained his primary focus, he started volunteering with organizations dedicated to combating organized crime and supporting victims of violence. He gave talks at community centers, schools, and local events, emphasizing the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. His message was simple: evil thrives when good people stay silent. But when ordinary people find the courage to act, extraordinary things can happen. Their efforts didn't go unnoticed. News outlets picked up their story again, this time highlighting not just the dramatic events but also the positive impact they were having on their community. Strangers reached out, thanking them for their bravery and sharing how their journey had inspired hope in difficult situations. Letters poured in from across the country, each one a testament to the ripple effect of kindness and determination. Yet, despite the attention, they remained humble. They weren't heroes, they insisted. They were just two people doing what anyone would do for the people they loved. Their goal wasn't fame or recognition. It was to create a better world for their child and for everyone else who deserved safety and peace. As the seasons changed, so did their perspective. Challenges still arose. Life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds, but they faced them together, always choosing love over fear. They celebrated milestones, big and small, from their baby's first steps to their own wedding anniversary. Each moment was a reminder of how far they'd come and how much they had to be grateful for. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching their toddler play in the yard, he turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think we'll ever stop being afraid?" he asked quietly. She considered the question for a moment before answering. "Probably not completely," she admitted. "But I think that's okay. Fear doesn't have to control us. We've proven that already." He nodded, smiling faintly. "Yeah, we have." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter laugh as she chased butterflies in the fading sunlight. In that moment, they realized something important. Their story wasn't just about overcoming adversity. It was about finding light in the darkness, hope in despair, and meaning in chaos. It was about choosing to move forward, no matter what. Life threw their way, and as they looked toward the horizon hand in hand, they knew one thing for certain. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a team, as a family, and as survivors.